Hello, everyone. All right, so welcome to Module 5. So Module 5 is talking about files, and the basis and objective of Module 5 is pretty much the which is Chapter 6, is writing context to an external file. So we use that with basically the open function. So the open function is the main function, and we also use something called a write function that's going to write something into a external file. The open function is going to allow us to open an external file, and then after opening the external file, the write function writes into that external file. So let's go and get started right away if we can. We'll do some couple exercises here. So we know basically starting with the def, that means to define a function. And here I wrote the function as basically write to file. So the name of the function, again, as everyone should know already, is basically is meant to be called. And here we can pass as many as parameters that we want. And a parameter is pretty much where we can have that parameter name, in that case, file underscore name, to call that parameter anywhere within our class. So here we have two parameters here. One is called file name, and the second parameter is called content. And here, this is basically where we start with the external file. So here we use the with here. So basically with is going to allow us to open an external context file. And here what we want to do is get the parameter name, which is basically file name. And here we can basically use a character text for append. So the A stands for append, which is going to append text to a previous file that has been written to. You have A to append, you have W to write, which is going to overwrite, and you have R to read. And here we're going to use basically A to append the text. So now we can use the add file. File is just a variable or the open function here. And you can put, and again, file, let me just repeat that. File is the variable or the open function. So here I can use the file now since it inherited the open function. And here we should see a pop-up box with a bunch of other functions. And one of the functions basically is to write. So we want to write to an external file here, as you can see. So we're going to use basically a /n for the next line. And this is only for formatting purposes here. Okay, just like that. And now what we want to write is basically, it's the content. So here, I'm going to put the content. Okay, like this here. And then here, we're going to call the content second parameter. So we want to write the content. So we haven't provided the content variable with anything yet, but we're going to do it soon. So here, we're going to write the write function again. And again, this is again for formatting purposes also. So I'm just going to use the same. So make sure it's the same length, like this here. And then I'm going to get rid of the next line here. Okay, there we go. So it should look something like that. Okay. All right. So with open function, append to the file, use the file variable to write to it. All right. So here I'm going to indent one space here, and we're going to print. We're going to again use that format, and then here we'll say this is some content, something like that. Okay, and you can write anything you want, pretty much. All right, and now here we're gonna, you know what? Let's do something like this here. Let's say something like confirmation file written. There we go. I think that looks better. Okay, and then here we can use the file name variable. Okay, just like this here. Okay. All right. So now we're gonna initialize the content variable, and this is where we're going to write it. This is the part where we're going to write to the file name. I'm sorry, not the file name, but the content. So here we're going to type in, let's say this is some content written to a file. Okay, something like that. Now we're going to call the second, I'm sorry, not the second, but the first parameter, and we're going to say file write to, and this is going to be our file here. So here I would say write.txt. So that's gonna, so write.txt is not created yet. So when we first initially run it, it's gonna create the write.txt, and it's gonna use the content, which is the second parameter, and then it's gonna write the content on basically on line number 9. Now, so what we could do is basically if you click on the start button, you should say the confirmation written file write.txt. Now you notice that we didn't put any kind of directory like a C drive, something like that, right? So basically we wrote basically write.txt. Now if you click on the open folder, you should see the write.txt. And if you go ahead and open that, you'll notice that basically it written down text. And here I'm just going to run it again. So you notice that we have an A for a pen. Okay, I'm just going to run it a second time. If we go to the write.txt, so you'll notice that here, let me go ahead and open that up again. There we go. You should see that file. Okay. All right. So now let me run it one more time. Give me 1 minute. I want it to append. So make sure it does append. Okay, there we go. So we have an A there, right? Yeah, okay. So here, this is what I want to find. Yeah, so we have a second write.txt, which is the second content. So every time I run that, it's going to keep writing to that particular file. Now, you can also basically put a directory that looks like this here. So if you do, make sure you put basically 2 slashes like that. Okay. Now, if you don't put any directory, it's going to by default, it's going to put it into the default directory of where your class.py exists. So in our case, it's basically here. So this is basically the way you should be doing it. This is the fundamental way of writing or creating an external file using the open and write function here. Okay. All right. All right. So we'll go on to the second project now. All right, in the second project, now we're going to get a user input here. Here, I'm going to type in basically our last underscore name. It's going to be equal to input function here. Enter your last name. Okay. First name, input function, enter your first name. And then here we're going to, as we usually do, have the input function. And then here simply enter your age. All right, so you notice that I didn't put an integer data type for the age, because again, I just wanted to print it out. Okay, so now I'm going to use a content variable, declare a content variable. Okay, and then here we're going to say, for example, the result, last name, like this here. All right, so last name. So here we're going to call the last name, like that. Okay. And the first name variable. So here we're going to go to the next line. Okay. There you go. So we also remember the curly brackets indicates that the last name and the first name is going to retrieve or display the input. Okay. So I think everyone knows that now. And then here we're going to call the age variable. Okay, that's going to look something like this. Okay, let's have another /n here. Okay, and I think we should be okay. All right, so it should look something like that now. All right, so now what we want to do, again, use the with open again. So here I'm going to say with open function. Okay. We're going to call the parameter. Okay. We're going to let's write to it. We'll change that later on. That's going to overwrite adds file, file.write, write function. We're going to write the content, which is basically the input. It looks like that. And here we're going to make sure you don't indent that. Okay. Okay. Format. And here we should say user info written to a file. to, let's say to B, and here we're going to call the file name, file underscore name, just like this here. All right, so now we want to call the function name. So basically the function name, that's how we call it. Okay, so we have one parameter, so we need one attribute. So here we're going to call the attribute or fulfill the parameter with the attribute with users.txt. So here's another way we can actually fulfill the attribute file name. Okay, so if we go ahead and run this here, now it should ask us basically three things. Okay, and if you look at the users.txt file, okay, you should see the name, just like this here. Now, if I go ahead and run this again, you notice that we got a write for W. Okay, and if you look at the users.txt and overwritten the previous write, so obviously. So here again, if I put a, that's going to append. The only thing we have to do is basically make sure, which we did this a while ago, kind of format that, right? So we want to make sure we format it like this here. Okay. Okay, so you format it just like this here. All right, and then once you go ahead and run that again, okay, there we go. All right, so here we should have two users now. So here we have Jane, and then obviously myself as the user names. Okay. All right, so here we're gonna have use an array to write multiple lines. So here, the only thing I changed was basically the name of the function called write multiple lines. Here's some instructions here to the user. All right, there you go. Okay, now we're going to use an array, and this variable without the brackets is just a variable. Now we have something called a variable array. Make sure you put an equal sign there. Okay, so what this means is once I start entering the last name, first name, and age, and so forth, it's going to enter it into the array right here. So the array variable acts like a container. It contains basically our inputs. Now here I'm going to use something called a while true. So while true, the array variable line equals the input. Okay, like this here. So this is going to say whatever I input is going to pass it to the array container or array variable. If line is just an array variable now, it's nothing really special. And here we're going to use the lower function. And then here we're going to say, for example, equals done. Okay, so again, if I type in done in any way of fashion or format, it's going to break it. So we want to break the loop here, okay? Now, after we break the loop, what we want to do is we want to append. So we want to append what we've written on the line, okay, to the array variable, just like this here. So that's going to append pretty much, right? So, so this is the array variable, plural, S. It's going to append whatever we input. Line equals input on line 7. So whatever we input into this here, which is line 7, is going to append to the container, which is line number 4. So this is one of the key parts here. Now here, we're going to use the with open again. Okay, with open function. File name. So that's the parameter that we're passing. And here we're going to append again. So add file, something like this here. All right, so now we can do the same thing. So write.file, okay. And here we're going to use something called, if you do a period, there's something called a join. So a join function is going to concatenate any number of strings. So basically it's going to join them, okay? And what we want to join is basically from the lines. So whatever we input from, which is again, in our case, is lines here. All right, so now we're going to use the print here, and then we'll say, this here, okay? And then here we'll say file name was recorded to. Okay, so again, that's just the confirmation. And then we're going to call. So what we want to call is basically this function here. Okay, so we will call that function. And then we're going to say something like the name of the file name. So in our case, would be, I'll call it like customers text file. Okay. All right, let's go around and see how this behaves now. Okay, enter the last name, first name, and age, and then type in done to finish. So here I'm going to enter my last name. Now, as we do this here, it's placing the sim and JSON into the container. So it's placing those two names basically into line number 4, because again, it's the array variable here. All right, so 45, and then here I can enter some more. So let's say Joe, Jane, 21. Okay, and let's do one more. We'll do something like Canner, Mike, let's say 67. Okay, and then if I type in done, you notice that here it's going to break. So you notice that here on line number 8, right there, if line.lower equals done, break the loop here. And then once it breaks the loops, it should go down to basically to line number 10 through 19, the rest of the code here. Okay, you click on enter, it should say the file name was recorded to. Okay, now if you go ahead and open it, if you go ahead and open up the customers.txt file, you notice that it written basically everything there for us. The only thing I wish I would have had basically the space between like this here. Okay, so it's for, again, formatting purposes. Okay, all right. Now, okay, so now what we want to do is read. So I'm going to create another function here. So right there. So we're going to say def read from file. And what we want to read from is basically from the file name again. Okay, there we go. All right, so we're going to say print again. Okay, so here I'm going to say format. There we go. And reading from reading file. Reading file. Okay, that's the only thing we need here. Just kind of messed up on that there. Okay, reading file. Okay, reading file. Here we're going to say the file name. File name. There we go. Okay, there we go. Okay, so now what we're going to use is basically something called a try statement. So the try statement is basically say try a batch of code. And here we're going to say, I want to try this code here. And this time we're going to put the letter R for read. Okay. And here we're going to same thing here as file. Now I'm going to say content, which is the variable name. And here I'm going to say file dot read. Okay. So we have a read function now. Okay. And then here I'm going to print the content, just like this here. All right, now since we have a try statement, I'm going to have to go back and say except. So, and then except if I find an error, and there's a class called found not found error. It's just like this here. And then here, if there is an error within lines 24 through 27, then find the error. So here I'm going to find the error, and then here we'll just type an error like this here. And then here we'll type in the name of the file name, like this here, okay? And then here we're going to say something like file not found, okay? Just like this, everything else is the same here, okay? So if the file is not there, then it's going to read this part here. Okay, but obviously the file is there. Which file are we talking about? Is the customers.txt file. So let's see how this works here. Okay, now enter the name. So I'm just going to say JJ, and 12. Okay, all right, I'm going to say done. Okay, recorded to. The file name was recorded to, so as you can see right there. Okay. Now, what we got to do here is basically call the function. So the function where we want to call is basically here. Okay, so what we want to call is basically this function here. So right there, so that's what I want to call the function called read from file from my write multiple function. And here I want to basically have to have that parameter again, file name. All right, let's go run this again. Okay, so I'm going to say JJ, let's say AA, and 13. Done. So as you can see now, it's reading the actual files here. So this is the first one, second one, third one, fourth one, fifth one, and so forth. Now, let's say, for example, if I delete the customers.txt file, like this here, I'm just gonna, let me just close this here also. Okay, if I delete it, now if I run it, like this here, I'm just gonna type in done, okay, reading file customers.txt, and the file was recorded reading. So as you can see, there's nothing to read. But we're never going to get this error because why? The customers.txt file is always going to be created for us. That's the only thing. Okay. So no matter what we do here, pretty much. Okay. So this is an example where you can use again the main pointers are the line array. It acts as a container. It's going through a loop. It's going to break that loop based on done. It's going to append from our input to the container. And this is basically where it's reading it. And the reason why we're calling read from file function within the write multiple lines, because the write multiple lines is being called out here. So when it gets called, it's going to automatically read this here at the last moment after it says recorded to. So it's going to read that, call that, read it, and so forth. Okay. All right, so now go ahead on module 5. Go ahead and there's some practice exercises in that lab. So after you complete the lab, and then go ahead and complete the exercises, the class exercise, I should say, and also the homework assignment that's due. That's due this Sunday, but that's on Canvas. That's what I'm trying to say. Sorry about that. All right. See you soon, and have a great day.